Welcome back. Well, John Anderson was part of a golden era of national leadership in this country. Together with John Howard and Peter Costello, they put Australia in the economic box seat. But 13 years after retiring from politics, he's partaking in public life against all expectations with a popular interview podcast and a campaign to reform our tax system. Let's find out about that and more. John Anderson, welcome to the virtual couch.
Good to be with you. That was not too much of a couch. I know I'm in need of a few things, but...
You've got a very comfortable couch there. That looks great.
It's a make-up in the living room at home, sitting in front of the old fireplace. Yeah, don't use the room very much, so it sort of works pretty well.
Excellent. I've got John Coates with me. You, when you were Deputy Prime Minister, you were working, or when you were an MP, you were working with the likes of John Coates on the bid. And then, of course, when you were Deputy Prime Minister, the games were here.
They were indeed. I remember, some pretty high moments, I have to say. It was well done, John. It was an enormously successful event, and we were all incredibly proud of the way that it ran. And, of course, it was secure. We had concerns. Atlanta had been interrupted a little bit. People sort of forget that, but it was a bit of a foretaste of what some human beings seem to be capable of doing to other human beings when they want to try and make a political point. Well, Sydney ran seamlessly. There was only one minor incident, and it was more or less sort of snuffed out before it got out of hand. And I think that was a great moment for Sydney as well. They were peaceful games.
Is it strange to both of you that we are now 20 years, almost to the week, since we hosted those games? Does it seem that long ago, John?
Certainly seems strange to me.
It seems very strange to me. And I watched for the first time the replay of the opening ceremony the other night, and I was just mesmerised, actually. And I reflected just on how well we did that ceremony and how well it showed Australia to the world. I thought it was very good.
Deputy Prime Minister under John Howard. What was John Howard like behind the scenes, privately, as a leader of men and women?
What you see with John is what you get, really. He's a very considerate man, and the way he ran things like cabinet made a huge difference. He was courteous, he was there on time, expected everybody else to be on time, he was consultative, he knew how to make sure that everybody had a say, and even when people were putting perspectives that you knew he thought were ridiculous, you had to know him very, very well to be able to pick it. Look, I have a huge admiration for him. One of the things that we forget in an age of instant gratification is that he patiently hung in there against many, many, many setbacks. John Coates will recognise a great sportsman has to do the same. He never gave up. His tenacity was extraordinary. And by the time he'd, if you like, been refined by the flames, he had a pretty good idea of how to ensure that people were properly heard. And representative government only works if you hear everybody and you weigh carefully what their contribution really looks like, and you don't dismiss it out of hand. You don't get good public policy without a good debate. We haven't had one of those for a very long time. Maybe even back at the time of the GST.
You wanted to get involved in a debate only recently. You're at the National Press Club. You were talking about tax reform in reference to changes to the GST and land tax. Why did you appear that day, and why is it one of your closest topics at the moment?
I've always had a very deep commitment to sound economic management, and actually the New South Wales Treasurer, Dominic Perrottet, to his great credit, asked 6 of us under the chairmanship of John Thodey to, if you like, sit down and have a long, hard look at the future of the state's finances and the relationship between the Commonwealth and the states. This is always a vexed area, the old saying, never stand between a premier and a bucket of money. And it's often the source of enormous, not just angst, but lack of cooperation. The fact is that all taxes have an impact on economic performance and growth and jobs, all taxes, whether we like it or not. Some have a much greater disproportional impact than others. So we spent FFR, Federal Financial Relations Group, we haven't been disbanded yet, a lot of time doing a lot of deep consultation about a lot of different aspects of how the state would fund its services going forward. Good thing that New South Wales initiated it because it's a big part of the economy. It's very well run. Its debt profile is extremely good. And yet Dominic Perrottet had and let's give credit where credit is due. The foresight to say 6 or 7 years out, it's going to be a different story. That was before COVID. Now, post-COVID, we need to get serious again about economic reform. We've got big challenges.
You mix it, John Coates, with a lot of corporate leaders. They must be worried about some of the results we're expecting in August, September of this year.
Yeah, it's the corporate reporting season that's going to impact. There certainly won't be the dividends flowing through, and that's going to impact a lot of people. The value of most companies is held up pretty well, but some are badly affected in some sectors, airports, airlines, those sorts of things. But now everyone's waiting to see how October goes. Job seekers keeping it all going.
One of the things I noticed at the National Press Club, John Anderson, was that you weren't trying to rewrite history. You weren't having a go at the current Prime Minister. You weren't having a go at current policies at all. But that's not the same with some of the old Prime Ministers of late, where we've seen lots of grandstanding, lots of history rewriting and legacy changing. And you know the people I'm talking about. We've got this miserable old ghost club on at the moment, John Anderson. Does it disappoint you that these people keep popping their heads up and popping others' heads down?
Look, I don't want to be dismissive of people who inject themselves carefully and wisely and make observations that arise not out of self-interest but out of concern for the community. That should be welcomed. We should welcome the input of our elders. But when it comes out of a pride, even a wounded pride, when it's designed to humiliate others, to drag them down, well, of course, the net result is that it drags everybody down, including the person who makes the comments. So, there's an old saying, the quality that I most admire in a leader is probably humility, frankly.
Yeah, well said. Talking about rewriting history, one of the big topics circulating the world at the moment, not just Australia, is about cancel culture and this idea that we're using current norms, current moral measurements on behaviours of colonialists 250 years ago. What are your thoughts about this very strong movement, probably stronger than it's ever been, for cancel culture?
I think it's unprecedented in the technology that it uses. But, I mean, how long have you got? This is really, really concerning. So-called progressivism is turning out to be regressive. We're going back to the law as it was of the jungle before we decided that no man should be above the law or no man should be below the law. That's a Teddy Roosevelt observation. And the other part of it is, here's the thing that people haven't understood. The age of identity politics has seen us forget the old understandings of virtue. So let's go right back to the so-called Aristotelian ones. I mean, I know this will sound a bit vague, I know, but I think it's actually important. We used to say things like prudence, which is making wise decisions, not just negative decisions, courage, justice, temperance, moderation, love, hope, faith. They were the sort of classic virtues that people said we ought to try and build in ourselves and admire in others. We no longer have that view. Virtue is now attached to people and causes. So if you disagree with me, I'm virtuous. Therefore, you're not virtuous, and I will wipe you out. Actually, the question should be, is this person, I might disagree with them, but I've got to start from the point of view that they're a legitimate human being, they're a fellow Australian, they've got a different perspective. Let's explore the ideas. I have no right to seek to cancel that person. No, there is a historical parallel, I believe. It was called burning people at the stake for having a different opinion. It was barbaric and non-Christian, and the churches eventually woke up and you had a massive settlement that you shouldn't burn people at the stake for having a minority or a different view, because apart from anything else, is pretty stupid. Tomorrow they might be in the majority, you might be in the minority. That's what happened all the time. We learnt not to burn people at the stake. We've unlearned that lesson. We've unlearned it. We've lost our respect for other people, and now we go them on the basis of their ideas if we disagree with them, and we know that cancel culture has resulting in anxiety, depression, self-harm, and sometimes suicide. It's pretty serious, and it doesn't reflect well on us.
Yeah, we've got to stand up to it. John Coates is a student of international history, and you have to be to do the job you do. You cannot use current norms to evaluate or measure behaviour of certain iconic people from 250, even 1,000 years ago. You can't.
No, you should be proud of your history. And in our case, we bring together teams from 206 Olympic committees and countries around the world, all with different political systems. Some we're not proud of, but they're all welcome to the games. And so we have in our philosophy strongly our fundamental principles. We're anti any form of racism, any form of discrimination. That's the starting point. But we have to be politically neutral, and that's in our fundamental principles as well. We'll go to China for the games in next year, in 2022. I've had to talk to President Mori, who's the head of the organising committee, former Prime Minister, and explain to him that the North Koreans are entitled to come to the games. They'll be invited by Australia. I've had him explain to me in tears the 24 abducted Japanese that he tried to help to get back when he was Prime Minister. Different political systems. We've got to live with that, and as John says, we've got to work with it. Yeah, we try to get through the athletes living together this mutual understanding and respect.
Now, John, we shouldn't be rewriting history. We should not be rewriting history, because you can learn the lessons of what worked and what didn't work. And I had a conversation with a young black American called Coleman Hughes, terrific bloke. He was in New York. You could hear the sirens in the background. And he's done a lot of research here, and it reveals that most of the Black lives, the really historical stuff, is built on falsehoods. And as he pointed out, black men traded black men traded white men.
Yeah.
Nobody has a monopoly on good and bad. We all need to recognise we can all do the wrong thing, every one of us, just as we can all do the noble thing.
Yep. Now, something completely different. Is it true? I don't know whether this is an old wives' tale or whether you can confirm it for me, John, but did Germaine Greer once say that John Anderson is the only Australian cabinet minister I'd want to bed?
I couldn't possibly comment. Actually, she did. It's true.
She did?
Yeah, very loudly from the top of the Guildhall steps in London. And my wife was with me and she said, "John, who is that?" And I said, "I have no idea." And then I suddenly twigged. Yeah.
Did you ever meet up with her afterwards? I don't mean privately, but accidentally?
No, we exchanged words at the top of the steps that night, and that was it. And then I asked her whether she'd do a conversation, because she's been subject to cancel culture. I don't know whether you're aware of that, but she made some comments about men being men and women being women, and being clear about the fact that there are limitations to some of the current debates, and it was immediately cancelled herself. I mean, come on. Is that what we've come to?
Yeah.
We face enough external and economic challenges without tearing the souls of our societies apart with this sort of nonsense.
Yeah. I should remind our viewers that you're doing a series of podcasts with some of the most iconic and successful people in the world, and you're doing it, some of it from where you are there. How popular has this been for you, John Anderson?
Well, we've been going 2 years and 2 months, I think it is, and we have a bit over 50,000 subscribers. We've had YouTube, so we've had 5 million plus video downloads. I don't know how many podcasts. Most of the people I met, so I listen to them going to work or, when I'm jogging or whatever. And that's the way young people, see, people say young people are not interested in ideas. Yes, they are. Yeah. The research shows that they prefer to listen to an interesting podcast, and they'll do it up to 3 hours in one session, like you and I might have read a good book when we were younger, if it really gets them in. Just people do things differently now. And that's been the interesting thing for us, is a number of younger people who come to us and say, here's a really good diet and mixture of interesting ideas we can't pick up at school or university or whatever.
Yeah.
So that inspires us to keep going. It's not monetarised. It's done as a public service, this one. Yeah,
the podcast, for some people, the podcast is the new book. John Coates, when you hear that Germaine Greer wanted to bed John Anderson, and when you see...
This is pretty embarrassing.
and to hear now that he's even in retirement, he's making a difference too. Had you ever been swayed or had a thought of getting into politics yourself? You would have been asked many times.
Yeah, I was, but no. I was committed to the sporting route. I was a lawyer for most of that time, then a company director, and I really couldn't see myself doing the hard yards that the politicians do in Canberra and away from family and all of those things. And I didn't really. It was a passing thought.
I could imagine. John Anderson, you once described it as was it a family killer, you said?
Yeah, it's pretty tough on family, but we worked at it very hard. And, family stayed together and we've been very close through it. But it is pretty tough. We had to set some very tough guidelines on when I'd be around. And then one day Julia said to me really interesting things. He said, darling, you're not doing too badly in terms of the time you're giving us, but it's second-hand time. And that was the greatest challenge of all, because often I'd be exhausted or my mind would be distracted or the media would be ripping you apart for something and you'd have to try and put it all down. So I'm just going to close the door on that and be available for my wife and my kids, because we had a pretty young family. But so did John Howard. So did Peter Costello, the two that I had the privilege of working with very closely. And, they kept their families together. So, you can do it. You've just got to have a willpower and the determination to say what really matters, because they're there at the end when the voters might not be.
I've just learnt something from this already tonight. Second-hand time. That's a really interesting
It's a good line, yeah.
It's a great line.